kind of been musing on that I think I'll bring up now is what you're saying, Mary Martha, about like advertising and branding and like how that's used in human rights advocacy campaigns. And that was something that like my undergrad is in finance. Well, yeah, it's a BS, right? Bachelor of Science in finance. And so we have to take marketing, and I've always hated marketing. But I'm like really pulling on a lot of that information now. And then now that I'm like studying, you know, human rights advocacy campaigns in my grad program, and really remembering a lot of things like from all the marketing that I was studying, and like seeing like what the tips and tricks and like how to functionally, you know, get your message out there and like stay on message and things like that. And it's really cool to kind of see these techniques being used instead of a product or even like a person. It's like on an idea, you know, which I've always thought that like, I was like, why don't we just do that? That's what I want to do. Like, that's really cool. And then realizing like, oh, okay, that is what people do.
I mean, and I think that they touched on it a little bit today about how important it was to the movement in Sudan for there to be international attention on it. And even Pramila Jayapal was saying that I wrote down her exact quote, even though I could probably recall it from memory. She said, like, members of Congress move when they hear from people in their districts. And I think that's so true. But if people in their district, if people in these Congress members' districts don't hear about and aren't interested and galvanized by what's going on in Sudan, then their representatives aren't going to hear about it, or aren't going to think it's an important issue to them, and then nothing's going to happen. Even though then when you do hear about it, you're like, we as Americans, at least, you know, when you're in elementary school, you're taught that like, oh, we are like the arbiters of democracy. We care about it so much. And then there's this whole peaceful movement towards democracy happening in another country. And I mean, I felt very ignorant today because this is one of the first times that I've like really, really heard about it, other than maybe in passing.
I feel like the current Black Lives Matter movement in the US is kind of demonstrating how important the marketing side or the advertising, like branding aspect actually is. Like, for me, it seems like almost the biggest debate that's been happening in a lot of circles is just about branding. It's like, should we use the phrase defund the police? And I feel like I've almost read more articles about whether or not that's the correct branding technique than whether or not that's the correct policy technique. And it's like,
oh yeah, definitely.
Which is kind of bizarre. It's like we almost, at least in some circles, we sort of like agree on what needs to be done. Like, a lot of the disagreement that exists now is about like, how do we like phrase and portray it?
Yeah, it's really, I think what's really interesting about it too is that there's like a different level of like how much information like people have and like how much time that they're interested in. Because like based on like how much you've actually thought about something, defund the police is going to be, and how much experience you have, you know, with like how things get funded in like, you know, in public policy or what anything. So even though, and something that I think about all the time is when it comes to communicating, there's really like three steps, right? There's like the idea that you're having, right? And then there's the language that you use to express it. And then there's what's heard by the other person, you know? And so like all of these steps, like there's plenty of room for miscommunication, right? And even like when it comes to, you know, what is heard, too, like that can be there's nothing you can really do about that, you know. That's somebody else's brain and like how they've been able to like associate images with ideas and words with like feelings, and like how they interpret language and understand things that may have nothing to do with reality, right? So it's really interesting to me because I do think that this will be like all problems that exist, and especially when we talk about like violence and like how do societies and people, you know, coexist. And I think about like relationships with each other, and there is so much miscommunication. And that is like the source of like all of our anxieties. And so I'm really stoked about, I think like the work that we will do for the rest of our species is going to be working on like how do we really communicate so that we are both like understood You know, and like based off, there is significant like ideology and philosophy that needs to be at the core of that, like, you know, a fundamental respect for like the dignity of another person, right? And so like that is absolutely 100% important. But like even if you have that, which I think that people kind of do because they like, well, I like to be respected and alive, you know, you can like figure that out, I think, for most people. But like the communication aspect of it, about like what that means and like how to enact that, that's like the most complicated thing that we'll always try to figure out for the rest of human time because we're also machines, you know. Anyway, so I'm rambling now. Aiden, save me.
Something I heard, Connor, in what you said was maybe that like in some ways it can be a distraction to think about branding, and I definitely agree with that. But I also think that in some ways branding is really important because different ways you phrase things, as you said, Nicole, get to the heart of issues in different ways. So like if you talk about like police abolition, for example, when you phrase it as police abolition, you're saying something entirely different, like at the heart of it, from what you're saying when you say defund the police, or even reform the police. Like to me, something that I've been thinking about a lot is that I think at the core of this whole debate is the idea that we as a society need to be protected from other members of our society, right? We've kind of like split ourselves into these two groups of criminal and like good citizen, right? And like it's a deeply racialized thing for sure. I think like that's maybe even where the roots of that kind of ideological divide come in. And so I think when you say reform the police, you're kind of, or even like just defund the police, you're not getting, in my mind, to the heart of it, which is that the very idea of police and a criminal justice system is inherently flawed because it relies on this racialized divide of ourselves into these two groups.
Can I just add to something that like I mean, like I remember like being very young and like understanding and getting acquainted with the idea of like, oh well, criminals, whatever, they're in jail, blah blah, we don't care. And then just the casualness with which we, if I may say, we're like totally fine with like people being raped. We're just like, yeah, it's a joke. We make jokes about it on like children's shows about not dropping the soap and like all this stuff. And I've always been like really floored by the idea that you can go to prison for like anything, you know, like like anybody, it's not, these aren't like different people, you know, like your actions have consequences. And like it's so interesting to me like that, you know, there's like a disconnect with like, you think that like some people deserve like specific treatment, you know, and of course like there is like a heavy racist element of this, you know. And I think am I right, have we all seen the documentary 13 on Netflix? Actually, oh, Aiden,
I've been meaning to.
It's great. I mean, it's very informative.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's obviously like, you know, a part of everything. But I also, it's just really interesting, the idea of that, like, oh well, you know, I don't really, the fact that we don't like, people don't care about what happens to like other people like in their community, that like, I mean, no one's going anywhere, you know, like people are, I mean, you know, what happens to people like in your society, even if you don't like see them, you know, like it's going to affect other things. And like, we have laws for this reason, and we should be governed by the same laws. Anyway, I just think it's really interesting how like you just like lose all of your rights.
I think there's this like weird mental divide for most people between like the bad things people do that aren't criminal, or at least that we don't deem to be criminal, and the bad things that people do that are criminal. Like, I think when people do bad things that aren't against the law, generally everyone agrees that those people like can be forgiven and deserve second chances. But for some reason, when it's something that we have decided is criminal, even if it's like much less harmful to other people, we're like, no, those people are done. Like, that's it. You can go rot in a cell.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You first.
No.
Well, then also like, I mean, I think this is bringing us back to the protests and even back to Sudan, like who's deciding what is criminal? So we should, in theory, have the right to peacefully assemble, right? But people are getting arrested anyway in the United States. And so, and then they get arrested. So that means, so then there are other like people in the United States who say, well, they got arrested, they must have been doing something wrong, they're criminal. Do you see what I'm not phrasing this correctly, but it's like once you get arrested, then you have this like stamp on you, right? And it doesn't, but then how do you go in and then change like what, like when I'm going off track, but when we're talking about marijuana legalization, like how do you go about changing that, or defunding the police? How do you go about defunding the police when the police are the ones who are deciding who goes to jail? So then they're putting you in jail for protesting defund the police. Okay.
Yeah. No.
We got there.
Thank you for bringing it back to Sudan. I think that's a powerful connection.
No, go ahead and have a thought.
I also think it's interesting talking about like the branding of Sudan as like a terrorist supporting state, right? And just like the connection there between like, oh, we've decided that Sudan is like a criminal government, right? And how that,
micro, Aiden.
Even though it's not the same government we called criminal in the first place.
Exactly. But we're still sticking this stuff on there. And I believe, is it $30 billion that they're asking for, that the U.S. is asking to be paid? Is that right? Does anyone remember?
I can't remember how much it was.
I got notes, but I don't know if I wrote it down because that was in the first section. But continue, and I will fact check you.
It's many billions of dollars, right? At the same time, Sudan is trying to like restart their economy. They're suffering under sanctions. How are they going to get $30 billion? So there are some people, I believe, in the U.S. who are saying, hey, repay us before we can give you the sanctions back, or we can remove the sanctions. Like, I mean, it comes back to the same idea of like, just like this perpetual punishment that we have that we treat criminals with here and globally.
The terrorism label for Sudan is also like a particularly good example of how arbitrary that is. I believe this was in the article that was sent in the webinar about the removal process for taking the Sudan off the state sponsors of terrorism list. But initially they were put on it in like the 90s for harboring terrorists.
Right.
And then after 9/11, like even like the old like genocidal Sudanese government stopped sponsoring terrorists and started collaborating with US counterterrorism. But because we were also concerned about the genocide in Darfur, we decided to keep them on the list, knowing that it had nothing to do with terrorism anymore. We were just like, we've found a different problem we have with Sudan. This is like a piece of leverage that we have from the past. Let's keep it.
Right.
So the U.S. has basically said they're guilty of something, so we're just going to keep them on this list.
So like we know that it's not terrorism, but like we still don't like them. So.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And when has crushing someone with debt and labeling them, as a criminal or as a terrorist state, when has that ever been effective in counterterrorism?
Oh man. Like the history of I just like for a small bit, just like in my what was it? What class was that? I forget what class it was, but it was like looking at international affairs and just like the origins of terrorism. Like there's no definition of it as well. So like it's great. It's like a vague law. It'll just, hurt whoever we feel like that day, unfortunately. But Aiden, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just like the same thing I was saying before, that basically like the link between our societal idea of punishment and how we need to punish bad actors, despite the fact that it's just not effective. If you're talking about like trying to prevent people from turning to crime, it doesn't work. We have one of the highest recidivism rates in the world.
But that's one of the things where we're definitely not, and I think we should have confidence that we can have conversations, and like work with like whatever like muck, figure it out. Like it'll be a slog, but we can do it, And one of those things that I'm talking about is getting like united and like having a consensus about like what are the goals, because I don't think, I think that we're very sure that hurting, like physically violently hurting people who have committed a crime, that's probably not going to give them like the reparative whatever, like mental health that they need or whatever it is, right? But I think it's important to acknowledge and address like that's not the goal, and so that the goal of like prison isn't so that people can be like reformed or get the help that they need, the goal of
you mean
like,
under our current system, or do you mean like in an ideal system?
I think in the hearts of people that are a part of various systems, there are like wildly different motivations that they believe personally, and like how that affects like how they operate within systems, right? And so like the desire to like hurt people in like the punitive flavor is like a stronger motivation for how they operate. And by they I mean like us, like anybody, right? And this it also includes like in terms of like reflecting it back on like in human rights advocacy, right? When you have like a project and you realize that someone you've worked against is like actually on board with it, and you're like, well, no, like I don't want them, like I hate you, right? Because like you're not, the goal of it, you're strong, you're more strongly motivated by like maybe like whatever feeling, that is of like, well, no, I don't want to work with you because like, and there could be reasons why you wouldn't want to work with somebody too. Like maybe it's not real, a good fit for whatever reason, or they'll slow you down or something like that. But I think that that's not always like taken into account, right? So if it comes to like, people that operate within like different systems of like how things are on the list, where it's like, well, I know that this could help Sudan, for instance, but like I'm operating from like maybe a scarcity mindset, or maybe I'm thinking about like, something else going on over here, and I'm not really that committed to like changing this as it is. And there's like a variety of like factors and motivations. Anyway, but when we were talking about like prison stuff like that, like for punitive wise, like people just want to hurt people, and like that's more motivating. Like, oh, well, this human being that needs things and they need to be a part of society. Mary Martha, what's up?
So like in an ideal world, when you're putting someone in prison, you wouldn't just be like deciding how many years are they going to be in prison for, and like what level of security and etc. You would want to be deciding, okay, what is our goal? Is our goal to like rehabilitate this person, or is our goal like an eye for an eye? And then with Sudan, when we're slapping this enormous debt on them, is our goal to punish them and like crush their economy? Or was our goal counterterrorism efforts, and was our goal to eventually have them have like, say, a democracy led by and for the people, which is what's happening.
I think in my opinion, at least, the punitive justification is pretty much always like morally unjustifiable, but like especially in the context of Sudan, where the people you're punishing are the wrong people. Like the sanctions hurt like individual Sudanese citizens, like not particularly the regime. The regime lasted 30 years and was not democratic. The people were not in any way responsible for any of the sponsoring of terrorism. So like the punitive mindset is so pervasive that people are even willing to like punish like millions of innocent people if maybe it harms like a couple of people that they deem to have done something wrong too.
And not only that, the sanctions are specifically they're on the table of things that we use, right, in order to foment like anxiety internally, and to maybe like get you're not going to be a popular leader because we're not working with you. And so it's like, well, what happens to an unpopular leader? Like they get ousted. So it's like, okay, they worked, but turn them off. It's over. We did it.
Well,
like the water is full.
I mean, and multiple people brought this up in the webinar, that's when we come up against the second problem in the US is process. And it just feels like every day I feel like the American people get more and more frustrated that saying like the government is broken, it's not working for us. And it does feel like that when there's something so obvious as delisting Sudan on the table. Like that, I don't understand how it's hard to understand how that might not even be talked about until July.
What were we talking about? So in the last one of these, we were talking about how there's kind of like holes. I don't know if you saw it, but so basically, who was it? Was it Sarah talking about how, yeah, like when it comes to like deregulation, right? So like people are working on like different aspects of like government and policy. But, you know, if you have a company that comes in, they may know that like there's not really anybody like looking at this particular kind of chemical. So, you know, they'll just go ahead and put it in and they'll deal with it later. But at the moment, like there's just so much to do that no one's like watching this right now. Right. And so I think that's part of like the idea of like a decentralized government where it's just like you don't have to ask everybody's permission all the time, like about a lot of things, you know, like I think it's the hope, right? Where like you give people the power and the knowledge and the authority, you know, to go ahead and make decisions about like their particular thing. So it's interesting because it's like there are people that like are studying this and that follow it and like know people and they've got like an entire thing. And that's why, you know, but we still have to have like a hearing in order to make sure that like we have permission to do the right thing, you know?
And that circles back to the media. Like in order for that to happen, we need to have enough attention on it that there's pressure to actually hold the hearing.
It's pretty clear. It's like, look, I work on this. Like, here's who I am. This is the information. Let me do the thing. Like, mother may I, you know? But I mean, like, that being said, it does need to go, like, people need to know about it, but maybe there could be like a, hey, we did this thing. I'm going to let you know. It's very public. So if nobody wants to do anything, I'm going to go ahead and do it as person in charge of this thing. Goodbye.
I think another thing to keep in mind is just that like race is central to this, as it is to so many things. You know, the idea that we're punishing the wrong people, like because people just think of like Sudan as like a monolithic, people in the U.S. at least, I tend to think of Sudan as just like a monolithic place. We punish. It's all one people. You just punish the whole place. And of course, you know the same thing. True. Yeah. So I think. In the end, people don't give it enough thought to even care, you know, and that's also why it's difficult to get it brought up in the legislature here. Nicole,
Connor, what happened?
I'm traveling for 1 second. I'll be back in a minute.
Oh, okay.
I'm still.
Right. I was like, did I do something? No. What?
You said something earlier about, or I mean, we were just having a general discussion earlier about how the punitive mindset is so like deeply ingrained. And I was looking it up and I couldn't find the exact organization, but there's an organization in the U.S., and I think we've talked about it before, that what they do is they go into like sentencing and they talk to the families of people who've been murdered. And they basically say, hey, you know, like recidivism in the U.S. is really bad. And what we do is we offer an alternative to prison for people who've committed violent crime, where we try to, you know, actually reform them, rather than sending them to prison to rot there for who knows how long. Is it okay with you, the family of the deceased, if we take this person and we try to reform them instead of sending them out to prison? And most of the time, the family actually says yes. So just like a little nugget of hope that people actually maybe are a little kinder than we give them credit for.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, what's crazy about that too, that reminds me, it just makes me think about like automatic sentencing laws and like how judges like don't want to like be so punitive, but like the system itself is like, I guess like somebody campaigns on it, and I think like, you know, the outrage machine that is inherent in all of us whirring away waiting for fuel. I guess like, you know, judges get elected, or I don't know like how. I need to like do more research into like how like mandatory minimum sentencing laws like pop up and where and how and why. But yeah, like so for whatever reason we have things within the system that just like crush people, and that also makes me think about the issue that we have like in schools with what is it, zero tolerance policy, where if you bring like a keychain or something, like, and the teacher is like, well, I've lost my humanity and I can't like address this with the parents or, you know, talk to the kids themselves. So now I have to go into a system, and then the police are like already in the school, right. And then we're just like shuffling minors away from their own rights as citizens. So it really is amazing how I think, what is it? Oh, I wrote an essay about this. So there's this idea of we have productivity tools. And so I was saying we also need and this is a whole Buddhist concept thing too. But I can't put the terminology of profundity tools. So basically we have things where, and this also goes into leadership theory or management that I took last semester, and talking about there's technical solutions and there's adaptive solutions, right? And so Aiden, I brought this up too, because I thought that was a really good point that I've been telling everybody. But so basically the whole thing with being productive and having technical solutions is that people will make stuff. We will make systems. We love it. We're great, a group. We're I assign you are head of the hierarchy thing. And then we make these little units, and we have lots of stuff to do. It's easy to come up with objectives and goals and having we make systems, right? And so the problem with that is that since we will just the human will just produce more systems and more technical and productivity things, and we'll just keep making content, and so it's really important to have times that you set aside to also strengthen the muscle that a lot of people don't get to strengthen a lot, which is your profundity. That was what I called it. So we need to have profundity tools as well as we have productivity tools. Can you
define what profundity is?
Yes. So kind of. Essentially, it's something that I didn't realize that I was talking about when I wrote that essay, but it's adaptive work. So the adaptive work that you need to do is basically changes that you need to make internally based off of, it's kind of reviewing a meta-analysis of how you think. And it's difficult to change your mind. It's difficult to change your behavior, and it's difficult to change how you relate to others, the way that you operate within systems. And so adaptive work versus technical work is what I was using for profundity versus a productivity. And so what that is, it's finding ways to change how you operate within the system so that you can better serve the objective, and then also the community and system within which you work, right? So for instance, if you were to have an office or something where you have a series of what's the problem? The problem is that these reports aren't getting done. And so the productive solution or the technical solution would be, oh, well, we just need to create a system. This happened exactly in my office. We just need to create a system in which so-and-so stamps the things. So all we need is for the boss to stamp something, right? But the adaptive work that needs to be done is realizing that the boss doesn't want to stamp the things because of some other things going on where he thinks that it requires his whatever, right? And there are technical reasons why, for compliance reasons, why they need to be stamped by the boss, but there are adaptive things that need to be addressed so that that person feels comfortable working within that system where he feels he can just stamp it or whatever. So there's an emotional aspect to it. So as opposed to just being okay, great, so team A needs to do X, Y, and Z, and then you check in on team A and they haven't done it. There may be a technical reason why, but there may also be an adaptive reason why, where they don't want to work together or something like that. And so I think it's interesting that we have systems where it's well, it'll be great. We want to have zero tolerance about this thing. It's yes, but it's really important to have opportunities to do adaptive work for the teachers, because they may not, it's not going to suit all of the students to just shuffle them into the zero tolerance policy where they are then trickling into and out of safety and into a dangerous system where we have decided to never do any kind of reform or solutions or anything.
I went to a workshop about disability justice where they talked about something similar where it's the same with hospitals, or the medical system. And, we already talked about it with the police, but in the medical system where there are certain, triggers for the medical system, I guess, where if someone is having an episode, then and you're scared that they're in danger, then you commit them immediately to a psychiatric ward. While maybe part of the reason they were having the episode in the first place is because they've been traumatized by being in a psychiatric ward. So it's it doesn't make logical sense to them put them there, but that's the system that we put in place. And I guess it's the same, and it's the same with the criminal justice system. Okay, well, this person may like be doing this because they've been traumatized by the criminal justice system, but we're going to just like put them right back in. And you know, Aiden, you brought up our recidivism rate earlier, which it's like we've put ourselves on these endless hamster wheels.
Yeah, I mean, and of course it's because we have like these. I mean, I like to talk about systems a lot. Like I like to think about, oh, you know, why do we do that? And it's because like, oh, you know, the way our campaigns are structured, the way our media is structured, we focus on the shorter term things and not necessarily the longer term things, because people want to come up for re-election, people want to see the 24/7 news story, whatever. So, but also like as Nicole's saying, like, you know, there has to be that like human element. And I think there's a really cool connection to be made between Mary Martha. You were earlier talking about kind of like the idea that how do you escape from a system in terms of like the police are the ones, you know, controlling things, and how do you like turn that around and pull the I guess the power away from the police, like actually was achieved in Sudan, and like there's a struggle happening here. And then Nicole, your kind of discussion of like working within systems, but also, you know, realizing that you need to like kind of like act personally within those systems. I'm just wondering how we can connect that to like the protests that are going on here and the protests that did succeed in Sudan. Yeah.
So I wanted to say something about something that I've noticed, like in the discussion around, you know, like the Black Lives Matter movement, like coming up, and I listen to like a million podcasts, and they're all like, I wonder like why now we care. And I cannot help but think, like, especially within like the media cycle, right? Because I think that is just pretty much like what controls like what the conversation is, right? It's like, well,
Yeah.
you know, you guys are like producing, like people can shout, you know, but it just depends on like how and what ways. And that is a part of like advocacy campaigns, because you have to shout like in different like rooms. You basically, you got to come in and be like, hey, I don't know what you guys are doing in here, but this is what we're talking about. Bye. And then, you know, you go to a different room and then you do the same thing. And make sure that everyone's like, oh, do you remember when that person came over here? And like, well, I work over here. I didn't even know that was a thing. And I work over here. But a big part of that I feel like is very, very obvious. And maybe it's different for everybody, but like COVID-19 is an amazing opportunity to really have to like stop and look at yourself, you know, like you're isolated. And I think you know, people, depending on like, I know that I create a lot of like productive like things. So like I've definitely had lots of, projects and jobs during this time on the computer, but not all the time. And also like being inside has me like personally made me like really tired and like really kind of lethargic at different points of the insideness, and not like having like normal stimuli or whatever. And like I think the physical aspect of that is like it is a time for reflection, and maybe I think that there are a lot of things like internally that stop us from like making the decision to really think about the world that we live in, because I mean, you know, it can be isolating and difficult, depending on like, you know, the more that you learn about something, the more that you realize that like, oh, people must not care. And that's like really demoralizing. And then, but having building up the courage to just kind of like, you know what, care anyway, and, you know, yell about it anyway. I think that's, you know, that's like the whole like kind of process. And so depending on where everybody is in that process of like, you know, finding out information, getting courage to like, just, you know, I'm going to think about it, even though if it's painful, or, you know, people are like, not, they're over here or something. I think that COVID-19 is a big part of that, because it's like a lot of adaptive work. And so this is like our big, like, specifically what I had it when I was talking about profundity tools, like in my essay, like a few years ago, it was really more of like how different, like in Buddhism, like we have this little thing, we have like things that we use in order to like kind of get in the zone for like looking at ourselves, you know? And so whether it's like, you know, a chanting practice or a meditation practice, stuff like that, right? Where you're able to kind of like look at yourself and like kind of just make decisions about the kind of person that you want to be, make decisions about the kind of world that you want to live in. And I think that this is like a big kind of tool where it's like, what kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of part of the world and a part of your community do you want to like be and like serve and be a part of? So I think that this is like a big time to do that.
Connecting back to what I said earlier, I think like with that self-reflection and like thinking about like you said, Mary Martha, about how we I think what I'm taking away is we invest a lot of power in the systems around us, right? And we believe that these systems, the police, the legislature, all of these, we believe they have power, but that's the only reason they really do, right? So you were asking earlier, Mary Martha, how do we navigate, let's reform the police when the police are the ones who have the power to put us in prison? I mean, I think the answer to that is just essentially that the power fundamentally rests with the people, right? And it's only because we imbue these systems with power that they have power, right? And so in this moment of self-reflection, I hope that people are beginning to realize that and see that that's the truth of it.
That's kind of interesting because I was going to respond to what Nicole said with sort of like an opposite perspective. Oh. Not that I disagree with what you're saying, but like when you're saying that it's very intuitive to see problems in the world and come to the conclusion that means nobody cares. But I actually think that that's like a false assumption, because the real problem is like lots of people do care. It's that people aren't the reason that there are problems. There are systems that are creating the problems, and people just changing their minds does not change the system as much as they might want it to. So in a way, that the reason I think that's kind of the opposite of what you were saying is like it's a little bit more, I don't think it's actually hopeless, but it sounds more hopeless because it's like the system, like changing minds doesn't change the system. But I think you're right that once we recognize that like more meta level problem, it starts to chip away at the system's power, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think what you have to do is you have to change minds about the system. Like changing minds independent of the system doesn't necessarily do anything, because I mean, personally, I don't think that our country is like super democratic right now, or has been for a long time. Maybe ever. Yeah. But changing minds about the system and making people decide that they're going to actually take the steps to change it can actually do something, I think.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to bring it back to what you were saying. I mean, I know you were talking about COVID as a moment for self-reflection, but I think that all over the world, this is going to be, it's not just self-reflection that starts, that is an impetus for changing the system. It's also it's really sad, but we're suffering as a country because of coronavirus. And one thing that I think we can learn from Sudan and a lot of other revolutions is, I was watching one video about it where they said the symbol of the revolution was bread, and it's because of the rising bread prices that people really, we're sick of it and we're ready to join together. And I think that we're seeing something similar happen here. I mean, not like bread prices rising specifically, but like there is a breaking point. And I think that there's a lot of factors that have gone into what has really pushed the Black Lives Matter movement to where it is. But I do think that not just the self-reflection that we've been having to do because of coronavirus and being isolated, but also all the other economic burdens and even just like having time to slow down and like see what's happening. We're all glued to the news every day, and we see it every day. It's hard.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I really like that point because I feel like it's a demonstration of what we're talking about in terms of getting people to be more critical of systems. So, like in Sudan, the protests began in 2018 because bread prices increased. And in 2019, the protests in Chile began because the metro fare increased by 10 cents. So all across the world, you see these protests that start because of these like really like not small because they affect people, but like mundane problems that are not like not obviously systemic, and they transform into critiques of the entire regime. So Sudan, the protests started December 18th over bread, and by January 1st, they were calling for the removal of the leader. So if I feel like the U.S. needs to take that next, not necessarily call for the removal of the, well, kind of, but.
Well, no, but I mean, we're having elections
systems.
and like, I mean, Elliot Engel's gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is
Booker almost won, or what's his name? Charles Booker, he almost won.
He was so
Charles
close.
Booker was close.
Almost.
I signed up to phone bank for him and then I didn't do it. I suck. It's my fault.
No, but like, think about how, I mean, I'm a media intern, so that's why my brain keeps coming back here. But think about how, I mean, I think a little bit more attention from the media or from, establishment Democrats could have pushed him over the edge. Like, and that's
that was the big thing too. And this is like a whole like progressive, sob story that I am very familiar with and a part of. But I was intimidated because I was like looking at Mitch McConnell, like and then I saw Amy McGrath and I was like, oh, it's like a wave of power and money. And I got scared and I ran away. And like, how many other I don't know people? Because it's like I don't know. It's tough because you can challenge certain things, but then it's like power is power, and like systems don't like it. And I guess that's the thing. I guess like systems exist to like funnel things to people, power to people, right? Certain people and away from others, I guess. It's like, that's why we make them. But Connor, to kind of like rebut your criticism of me and my ideas.
I don't think I was criticizing you.
No, you weren't at all.
Okay.
But so the only thing that I wanted to kind of bring up that I was thinking about like people versus like systems, and the system is a problem and like people can't change their minds. I think it's yes, but like all of it is, both of those things can be true, right? Because while the system is a thing, right, that we make up and give power to and consent to governing, right? People are a part of that, at every step of the way. Like they're individuals capable of like, crazy, transformations internally, and they make up every single level of that,
Yeah.
That was my only kind of observation where it's like, it's weird because like people are the system.
There's definitely truth to that. It is absolutely both. Like on the one hand, yes, establishment Democrats gave Amy McGrath $40 million to say she was going to vote for Brett Kavanaugh. But also,
I know
she did win like an actual election. Like people did vote for her. So it's both.
Over here, it's trying to think about what I think about Amy McGrath.
Something, this is kind of out of left field, but I keep thinking about it. Have you ever heard of, has anyone ever heard of accelerationism?
Yeah.
No.
So it's a very out there political.
But I don't remember what it is.
It's a very out there political ideology that's basically like, we have to make things as bad as possible under the current system so that a revolution will happen to switch it to the system we actually want.
No, that's not that out there. That is what a lot of people have said they were thinking when they voted for Trump over.
I mean,
I can't believe that. That's insane to me.
Typically, I think of that.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? I think I know what you said, but my internet cut out.
Who?
And also, I think it relates to,
no.
I was just watching a documentary on Reconstruction. So go ahead. Aiden, what is acceleration theory? I'm sorry.
Okay. Acceleration theory is...
Aiden, yeah.
Okay. Acceleration theory is that we have to make things as bad as possible under the current system so people will get angry and have a revolution to switch it to a new system that you actually like. So it would be like, yes, voting for Trump and, like just insane, like crazy inequality is just making things as bad as you possibly can. And apparently Mary Martha says people actually like believe that, which I find crazy.
Yeah.
I remember that. I remember that being brought up.
That is like a fringe, like academic, like crazy theory. But I remember reading this article, like, I don't know, a couple months before or no, it was a couple months before the Republican primary was over. That was like Democratic voters should go vote for Trump, root for him to win, because then he'll lose in a landslide in 2020, and the coattails of him losing in a landslide in 2020 will enable more like state and local Democrats to win, which will help them redistrict after the census so that Democrats will have more power for the rest of the decade. And it's like a micro version of accelerationism that like works within our current political system, but is still like the same fundamental philosophy of make things bad so they're good is there.
I mean, to some extent, like, I don't know. I almost find myself thinking in an accelerationist mindset, like right now, right? Like you were talking about, like in Chile, the fare for the subway, and in Sudan, the bread, right? And I think we're headed to a very similar place right now. You know, where it's 50% unemployment, right? Like the highest it's been since like the Great Depression.
Great Depression, yeah.
And then
the Great Depression is 25%. I think.
Oh, okay.
I'll look up what unemployment is right now while you're talking.
It's crazy bad. It's really
depends on
bad.
If you include like the labor non-participation rate too. So
yeah, and then evictions like happening today. Who knows how many? So many. 40 million people without jobs. Most people without health insurance. Like we're on the same route in terms of that. But like I'm almost afraid that like the Trump administration or someone is going to like offer just enough to stop it, which that's a very accelerationist way of thinking. But yeah.
To be fair, that happened in Sudan and it didn't work. Like the military overthrew the dictator, and they were like, okay, now we're gonna like institute this military government where it's like his right-hand man was gonna be the new leader, and then the protesters were like, no, and kept protesting, and then eventually they got like a at least partly civilian government. So I have at least some faith that like the Trump attempting to make like an offering is not like the movement's not gonna buy it.
I agree, and I think there's I just want to say one thing real quick. So first off, I think Trump's too dumb. I don't think that he like has the political know-how to like realize how much he's in trouble or like how much to give. I don't think he's.
There are some very easy PR things that he could have done that he has not done.
Yeah, no, I think he's an absolute idiot. I think there were people who thought he was playing 4D chess like years ago. Clearly not.
People
true.
always think everybody's playing 4D chess though.
But nobody.
You know? Yeah.
He's not. He's playing checkers.
Badly.
Tic-tac-toe.
Okay. Ader, do you have another point? Because I got information that I want to share.
Just one thing.
Go.
Also, I think fundamentally, the problem, one of the biggest problems in the U.S. is just straight up inequality, right? Like that's just the central one for me. It's inequality and race, which are like deeply tied. And the problem is, in order to stop like a quote unquote revolution from happening, you'd have to do something about inequality, because like that's the problem. That's what's causing people. But the people in charge, they don't want to, because they profit from the system of inequality, and they're so entrenched that they don't think it can change.
And I don't think that's exclusive to the Republican Party either.
No, absolutely.
Oh. It is a deeply like. So what I was gonna say, right, is that in terms of like trying to create a strategy out of the universal concept that actions have consequences, right? Or there are cause and effect, and it permeates the universe. Like it is 100% true, right? That sometimes, like I guess all times, right? Like a thing happens and that there's backlash, right? And so I can definitely see the logic of trying to make sense or like trying to plan for like, oh yeah, we'll do this and then they'll do this. But considering that that's true for absolutely everything and it does not stop, right? So like you're never going to stop that wheel, right? Right? It's never going to be like, we'll elect Donald Trump and then everyone will hate the Republicans and it'll be over. It'll never be over, and then we'll have like a big upswing of like, progressives getting elected in 2018, 20, congratulations. And then like, guess what? A bunch of other shit is going to happen. Like that wheel never stops, So I think it's really interesting because I do think that there was a lot of discussion about like, oh no, it'll be great. Donald Trump will be a terrible president and like, we will reap the benefits in the future. Like that is true, right? Like, like but it's true because like actions have consequences, like there's cause and effect. And like, we're all going to see that like, oh, rich people are really lazy and incompetent. Okay, cool. I can do anything. There's no magic. No one's in charge and no one has more authority than me. And then, yeah. So yes, of course, like you will see things and they will inspire you and you will change, decisions in your life and like relationships that you have and like where you live and what you do. Right. Yeah. But it is kind of a bummer that there is like a general idea that like, well, no, once I get the effect that I want, then it'll be done. It's like, no, of course there's also damage. It's like deep, deep, deep damage and pain that we will all have to work through for the rest of our lives. And, and more pain will come and then we will, get more courage and like, we'll overcome that and it'll be great. But like the wheel never stops, the wheel of cause and effect and consequences and actions will never like end. So that was like my only 2 bits that I wanted to put into that, because I do think inherent in the conversation of like the strategery of like acceleration or whatever that is, it is dependent upon a thing that is true and that makes it correct, and then a thing that is not true, which makes it incorrect. And the true thing is that actions have consequences, and the not true thing that devalues it is that then it will stop. And then, the actions will stop having a consequence, and I can like, negotiate them into a way that I can plan and control. So that was my thoughts about acceleration.
I think that's really cool. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's a very good critique.
Agreed.
I think it's a good thing to take in too, because I've heard, people who I know who were on opposite sides of the issue being like, well, when will it be enough for these protesters? They got this. When will it be enough? The guy's arrested. When will it be enough? And I think it's almost, it makes me feel better anyway. Okay, maybe it'll never be enough, but that like, yeah, that just accept that now and like, and then keep pushing forward.
One of the best things that like switches I ever like pulled in my brain was like the aha moment of your work is never done.
You never get graded.
Yeah, you're not going to get graded. What you're going to do is you're going to progress on certain things, and then you pass it off to the next person, because every single person is contributing to the system that currently exists in different ways. And like each one of us that contributes to the systems that we live in, we can change things about ourselves, right? But that work is never over. Like every day you wake up and you create new karma, essentially, is what's going on, And that's a whole other concept. And like now it's like 1:58. But like that's essentially the idea, right? Is that like there's no deadline. Nothing ever finishes. And like your consequence, like, the actions that you make, they reverberate forever, So
we stay here and talk all day, please.
I wish, honestly.
This is a lot of fun.
Great conversation.
And I never even got to ask Connor. I was going to ask you because your project is going to be your nonviolence methodology project is like on Sudan.
Yeah.
But we talked about like everything else. We talked about Sudan.
We talked about Sudan a little bit.
Yeah.
Not as much as the U.S. probably, but still. We talked about the parallels a lot.
Yeah, and that's what this is all about. Getting to know each other. This is really cool. I'm really glad that we got to join together and have like a kind of loose conversation about stuff going on. Yeah, it's just about 2:00, and I think that we started on time, right? I think we did that.
Yeah. So there. Yeah. I'll just let you know there was a minor problem for the first 5 minutes, so we may have missed our introductions, but it's fixed after that. So. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, then let's sign off in some capacity where we kind of rehash that, I guess. My name is Nicole Hemo. I conduct research at Nonviolence International New York. That's all I really feel like saying about myself. So that's been good.
I'm Aiden. I create videos and do this for Nonviolence International New York.
I'm Connor. I'm a research analyst on the disarmament team at Nonviolence International New York.
I'm Mary Martha. I'm a brand new media intern at Nonviolence International.
Yeah, and this has been the Intern Breakroom Wednesday Fun Time Hour. I think we're just calling it the Breakroom. So
yes.
Yeah.